distinguished guests, and esteemed dignitaries. Welcome to the keel laying ceremony of the ancient stitched ship at Hodi Innovations, Goa. We are honored to have you all here today to mark this momentous occasion.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to begin by extending a warm welcome to our esteemed dignitaries present here today. It is a profound honor and an immense joy to welcome each and every one of you here today at this momentous keel laying ceremony for our ancient stitch ship project. Today, we gather not only to witness the birth of a vessel, but to celebrate the revival of age-old traditions, craftsmanship, and the enduring legacy of our Indian heritage. We are forging a vessel that is not only going to navigate the waters, but also sail through time, carrying with it stories of our heritage and the aspirations of our future. I would like to end with a quote in Hindi. जहाँ कश्तियाँ जिद पर हो, वहाँ तूफान भी हार जाते हैं. Any problem, any rough seas or stormy weather we face during the construction or sailing of this project, I hope that we traverse them successfully and emerge victorious. Thank you, Jai Hind.
That was incredible and a proud moment for me to call him here on the stage. We are privileged to have Sri Sanjeev Sanyalji with us, who is a member of Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India, our guest of honor, who sowed the seeds for undertaking this historic project to revive India's ancient maritime past. We request Sanjeev ji to share his insights and thoughts on this remarkable day.
I think it's important to remember that India has this amazing maritime history and heritage that unfortunately is not given enough credit. Always remember that India is the only country in the world that has an ocean named after it. And it's not for nothing. Because from the beginning of time, Indians have had a great history of maritime exploration, maritime trade, of military excursions over the seas. And so it is only suitable that we should go back and begin to explore this incredible history. So I'm going to give you a very short sort of history lesson. It's thousands of years of history, but I'm going to say it very, very quickly. So if you went back to the Harappan cities, very often we talk about Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, but these are landlocked cities. In fact, one of the biggest sites of the Harappan civilization actually is Dholavira, which today, if you look at a map, looks like it is landlocked, but in fact was one of the biggest ports, perhaps the biggest port in the world 5,000 years ago. It's today locked in the middle of the Run of Kutch, because the Run of Kutch is now salt flats, but 5,000 years ago it was the estuary of two great rivers, the Saraswati and the Indus. And sailors from there would sail down the Konkan coast as well as sail all the way through to Mesopotamia, to Bahrain, to Oman. Unfortunately, this particular period of naval expansion came to an abrupt end due to climate change. The sea levels dropped, the Saraswati dried up, and these cities were abandoned. But that didn't mean that we abandoned our maritime explorations. The history of maritime exploration then shifts to the east coast, to the area that we now know as Odisha and West Bengal. So the coast between the Hooghly outlet of the Ganga and Lake Chilika then became, in the Iron Age, a major source of maritime activity. And you see ships sailing down from Odisha, Bengal area, down the coast to Sri Lanka, but also sailing the other way, along the coast. And remember, at this juncture, this is 5th, 6th century BC, they didn't know how to cross the oceans directly, so they had to hug along the coast, and they would go along to the Isthmus of Kra, which is the bit of Thailand from which Malaysia hangs off, and they would cross over to the other side and then sail to the Mekong Delta, which is now Cambodia and Vietnam. And then from there, they would sail all the way to Korea and China and Japan. And in fact, Korean history as it is taught in their textbooks, actually begins with the marriage of a local prince to a princess from Ayodhya. So how did the princess from Ayodhya get to Korea? Well, by sailing across these sea lanes. Now, by the 1st century AD, Indian mariners had worked out that you could use the monsoon winds to cross the oceans directly. Now, remember that the monsoons are very unique kind of climatic phenomena, in that the winds blow in one direction for part of the year and in the exact opposite direction for the rest of the year. So it allows you to go somewhere and then use the same winds to come back. And so using these winds, merchants from the west coast of India sailed to Persia. They sailed across to Socotra, by the way, which derived from an Indian name, Dweepa Sugadhara. And they would sail through Yemen up to Egypt and the Gulf of Aqaba, which is now Jordan and Israel. And they would then cross the deserts on camel trains and go on to the Mediterranean. So there were lots of Indian merchants in the Mediterranean during the Roman Empire. And similarly, there were Romans and Greeks, etc., sailing to India. And on the other coast, there were Indians from, by this time, the entire coast was full of maritime activity. There were great empires like the Pallavas and the Cholas who built maritime empires. And they were sailing on a regular basis. Hundreds of ships were sailing across from India to Indonesia to Malaysia. There were great empires which were Hindu-Buddhist empires called the Majapahit and the Srivijaya. And this was also a period, 1,000 years ago, when there was a lot of geopolitics happening. So very often people think that maritime geopolitics of the Indian Ocean is something modern, but it's nothing modern. There were Indian ships sailing all over the Indian Ocean. So what were the kinds of ships they were using for this? So the kinds of ships they were using was quite a unique design. These were called stitch ships. So how are they different from other ships? Well, the ships in the Mediterranean and also the ships, for example, in the South China Sea, they were built basically by using nails to nail together a ship on a wooden frame. But the Indians came up with a very unique design of tying together a ship, almost stitching it together without using nails. Now, there's a lot of controversy about why Indians did not use nails. There are all kinds of talk about superstitions of various kinds. But let me say, it wasn't because Indians didn't know how to make rust-free nails. In fact, we were the first in the world to find how to do rust-free metal, rust-free iron nails and other metallurgy. Because even today in Mehrauli, you have the rust-free, it's a Gupta era, 4th century AD pillar, which are still not rusted. So we knew how to do rust-free metal. But for reasons that are still debated, we insisted on building our ship using this very unique technology of tying the ship together using the planks. And we have many foreigners who left us reports of this. We have Indian texts that mention it. We also have depictions of Indian ships made using this particular technology. And these were not small ships. These were large ships, and we know that they had cabins, and they were, of course, crossing the seas all the time. And this technology basically was used till the Europeans arrived in the Indian Ocean. However, this technology had one big flaw. And so once the Europeans came in the 16th century and began to colonize the Indian Ocean, the Indian technology came up with one major flaw in that it was not suitable for the use of cannons. And it was not just when the cannons were fired at your ship, but in fact the ships themselves couldn't take their back blast of their own cannons. So ultimately what happened is that over time, Indians ourselves, for example, by the Maratha period, shifted on to using the European nailed frame type of ships. And this particular style of stitch ships began to be used for smaller and smaller ships till the late 20th century, and today this is now a dying art. And there are very, very few people who know how to make ships by stitching it together. Very small coastal fishing boats are made using this technique, but this technique is now rapidly dying out. Luckily, we have one team led by Babu Shankaranji who still have remembered how this technique is done. So I thought it's a great idea that we should try and record how this is done and build a ship using this. For the first time in many generations, we are going to build a proper large ship using this technique. Now, so that you know that this same technique was used by the Arabs. In fact, the Arab dhows used to be built in India because they don't have wood. So the Arab dhows used to be they're actually Indian-built Arab dhows. So Babu Shankaranji actually a few years ago helped the Omani government to build a 16th century, 17th century Arab dhow. But we are going to be more ambitious, and we are going to go back another 1,000 years or more to the 4th century AD. So this is a ship that we are going to recreate from 1600 years ago. There are many inputs we have taken, but the rough idea is derived from a painting of a stitch ship in Ajanta. You can Google this up, so I don't have to tell you. Just type in Ajanta ship, and you will see the ship. We have adapted it, of course, because the ship that is there has 3 masts, and we didn't think it was suitable for a ship the size we are building, which will be about 21 meters. So we will build one with 2 masts, but nevertheless, other than some safety equipment and some things we will allow for modern technology, this ship will be built essentially for all practical purposes as close as possible to this ancient ship design. And with that, not only are we going to build it, we are going to attempt to sail this. So it's going to take us about, I think, 18 months to build it, another 6 months to test it, and that's very important. Remember, we have not sailed these kinds of ships for generations. So, and these ships that were there even a few generations ago were not the same as the ones that we are going to build, because we are looking at a ship from 1600 years ago. So there are many, many things we need to understand which are different from modern sailing ships. For example, the hull will be flexible because we have stitched it together and not nailed it. We will use square sails. Today, if you look at yachts of today, they are all lantille sails, those triangular sails. So those can sail at an angle to the wind in ways that this square sail ship will not be able to do. But we will have to adjust it around a bit to at least be able to sail at a slight angle at least. And so we'll have to experiment with that. We will not be using a rudder. We will be using 2 trailing oars, which is how the original ships used to be. But again, we have not used these kinds of trailing oars for hundreds of years. So again, we don't know how this will behave, particularly in a storm, which we are almost certainly going to face at some point. So all of these are complete experiments. So we need to test it. And then the idea is, hopefully, in 25, or if it doesn't work, maybe in 26, in Kartik Purnima, which is in November, when the full moon rises and the winds blow from the north to the south, we will try to recreate something called the Bali Jatra, which is literally called the voyage to Bali from the Odisha coast to Southeast Asia. So with that, let me stop and say that this is a true adventure, and I really look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable inputs, your valuable insight on maritime history of India. Next, may I call the Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral R. Harikumar, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, ADC, to address the gathering.
Ms. Meenakshi Lekhi, Minister of State in the Ministry of Culture, Sri Sanjeev Sanyal ji, Member Economic Advisor Council, Vice Admiral Sandeep Nathani, Chief of Material, Vice Admiral Kiran Deshmukh, all the flag officers present here, personnel from the Hoti Shipyard, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. It's a matter of great pride for us, the Navy, to welcome the Honorable Minister, Ms. Meenakshi Lekhi ji, to this healing ceremony of the ancient stitch ship. Your presence here, ma'am, is testimony to the government's commitment and resolve to take India to the world, and the pran of Virasat Pe Garv, which the Honorable Prime Minister had announced last year. I also welcome Sri Sanjeev Sanyal ji, one of the leading contributors for setting our history right in many ways and highlighting our maritime heritage, which the Navy has been struggling to bring out and create awareness amongst the population of our country. And naturally, he is the brain behind this wonderful idea. So today marks the beginning of its manifestation of the idea in the physical form, actually the translation of the idea into action. The very fact that we have the government, the armed forces, the academia, the shipyard, industry, artisans, all converging here today is testimony to our shared dream of propelling India to its rightful place. And for that to happen, our youth must be galvanized towards our national cause. Young Indians should be more conscious, curious, and confident of our cultural and civilizational past. So it is our duty to connect the present with the past to usher in a vibrant and aspirational tomorrow. So I'd like to assure you that the Indian Navy is very, very clear about this responsibility. We have initiated a number of measures to shed colonial vestiges and reconnect with our civilization values. Our new ensign, the naval ensign, is a prime example. Since independence, the naval ensign almost always carried the colonial St. George's cross. It simply had to go. And on the 2nd of September last year, we had changed over to the new naval ensign. We had sought ideas for the design of the new ensign and received enthusiastic response from far and wide across the naval hierarchy as well. And the result was the new ensign, which is inspired by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's Raj Mudra, reminding us of this wise adage, Jalameva Yasya Balameva Tasya, or one who controls the seas is all powerful. So therefore, when this idea of recreating the ancient stitch ship and retracing the old sea routes emerged, the Navy from the very beginning decided to be more than just a willing partner. And for the Navy, this ship is a step to free our nation from sea blindness, kindling maritime consciousness, wherein, following the footsteps of the government, our citizens take to the seas to reach out to the world, be it commerce, culture, connect, and co-prosperity. And mind you, this is exactly what our predecessors, the ancient seafarers, did when they embarked on these ancient stitch ships for their voyage, and they continued for centuries, taking trade, culture, and ideas across from our land to various corners of the world. So this should then lead to maritime thought as to how can we use the oceans today for economic, diplomatic, cultural, and many other aspects that a nation needs. As our country grows from being the 5th largest economy to perhaps the 3rd or the 2nd or even the 1st, largest economy in the world, what happens is that our trade increases. We produce things, we import things, and all that has to come by the sea. Even today, 92% of our trade by volume and about 68% by value comes through the sea. When you take the value out of the balance, 32%, I would say about 40% of that itself actually comes through the sea, because that is the services that we offer as a nation. And the services depend upon the internet, and the internet and the data comes through undersea cables. 99.9% of the internet data comes through the undersea cables. So therefore, in a sense, even by value, I would say perhaps more than 80% of our trade actually comes through the sea. And as we grow into a larger and larger economy, this dependence on using the sea for transportation is going to remain and only going to increase. So therefore, the importance of the seas and the awareness of the seas and awakening the maritime Indian in each one of us to realize as to what is the potential that the seas have to offer. So in the journey of any ship, from its conception to its operation, there are actually 4 distinct landmarks: the keel laying, the launching, the outfitting, and then the commissioning. These are the 4 broad things that happen whenever you build a ship. And I feel these steps provide a good template to convey what we have set to achieve with this project. So today we are laying the keel of the ship, and that takes us to our past, the past forward, I would say. And then we will launch the ship, and the launch to launch an enduring mission which awakens the maritime Indian within each one of us and within the country. The third, when you talk of outfitting with the ship, I feel that we will be outfitting with the ship with the message of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, or the world is one family. And thereby, when we commission the ship, we will be commissioning a Naya Bharat, a country awakened, and a civilization resurgent, very much aware of its past. So on that note, I will conclude. I thank the Honorable Minister and also Shri Sanjeev Sanyal ji and all the others who are present here today for launching this project. I wish the very best to all stakeholders in taking this ambitious project to fruition. Thank you. Jai Bharat, Shano Varun.
Thank you, sir, for your precious and inspirational words, and as quoted by you, an initiative by Navy to connect the present with the past. May I now request the chief guest, Srimati Meenakshi Lekhi, Honorable Minister of State for External Affairs and Culture of India, to share her thoughts on this momentous occasion.
I will start from where Admiral left. He said that when a civilization is awakening, and these were his last thoughts on this particular project and program. I will begin with this. And I would say a new beginning, a new awakening is already happening. And when the Prime Minister says that we've entered the Amrit Kal, the time of awakening has already started. And I only look at it from the perspective of premonition, that just a day ago, at G20 gets over and Prime Minister launches the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which is kind of a logistic management chain through the old maritime routes and further on. And today we are at the keel laying ceremony of ancient technology which Indians used, and Indians used it in a peaceful way. That's also very important. And going back to the history lesson which Mr. Sanyal very kindly gave us, I would just add up a few things. Since Dholavira has already been talked about, I'll go to Lothal. And I would say that Lothal is one of the oldest shipping dock, or dock, I would say, dry dock today. And this tidal dock, 6000 BC, can you imagine? And that time period, India had maritime trade all across, from Mesopotamia to Central Asia, and all over we were going, we were traveling, we were the seafarers. Archaeological Survey of India excavated that site. We also found a shipwreck, and that shipwreck identified the wood to be Malabar teak, which is the Kerala teak. And Malabar teak or the Kerala teak was used because of its durability and its quality that it will stay away from the decay. As compared to several centuries later, the shipbuilding started in other parts of the world, and they would use oak wood. Now, oak wood does not have the same durability as we have. So most interestingly, the technology or the understanding of navigation, use of compass, was very much available with Indians, even at Harappan period. And post-Harappan times, if we move a little later, the Mauryan period also describes that there was a superintendent of ships. Imagine, superintendent of ships is a post as part of administration. That means we were controlling the seas, and we were really good at that. And if we move little later period, from Mauryan to shift to Gupta period, the Gupta period also mentions that there were 1, 2, 3, 4 sail ships. And all this detailing mentions, and there are written texts to that extent. We have a book which is called Yukti Kalptaru, and that Yukti Kalptaru is deciphering the shipbuilding itself, the types of ships, the kinds of ships, the purpose, classification, cabin size, so on and so forth, and armored ships also for carrying on the journey. And these descriptions find mentions, both literary and other inscriptions. You find it all across. From this, if we move on to further period, as Mr. Sanyal very kindly mentioned about the idea of taking this ship for the journey to Indonesia, Bali Yatra, my request here would be that please document, I'm sure you will be documenting the shipbuilding itself, but document the entire process and the history itself, because I'm looking at it from two perspectives. One is we can propose Project Mosam, and in that Mosam, because you talked about the trade winds, you talked about the sailing through the winds. So before the steam engines were invented, we were sailing through the ships and using the then available technology, which is the wind velocity. So if we document this and use the text like Yukti Kalptaru and other such textual methodologies, we could sell this and we could send this as ICH, the Intangible Cultural Heritage of India, and maybe we can send it as multinational entry into the system, because that's also about relationship building. Everybody would want to stake a claim in this heritage, and that gives us a positive insight into the cultural methodology as well. So I would be watching over it and taking a keen interest in it, and would definitely want this to progress ahead. So whether it's the western coast or it's the eastern coast, and very rightly mentioned that such a big coastline, having a sea named after us, and yet giving up our traditions, I'm sure a lot of wrong has happened to history. And a lot of wrong has happened to us civilizationally. Time to correct all that. And that is the Amrit Kal all about. So new awakening, a new dawn, which introduces all of us to our own heritage, which makes us helps us to take pride in our culture, value system. And it was not just about culture, not just the art, which of course you see in relics, you see in stone reliefs in Jagannath, you see it in literary texts like this, and other, even Ajanta Ellora, as he mentioned in his statement. He also can look at Lord Buddha when he travels to Sri Lanka, that time called a land of 7 gems, or Saptratan. Even there, he travels from Bharuch as one of the bodhisattvas in his previous lives. He travels from Bharuch to Sri Lanka. And along with him, he carries 700 merchants. So there is a mention which is about Samudra Vanijya Sutram, and there this particular depiction is mentioned. So there were large ships carrying 700 people, 800 people, 1,000 carpenters. All this is mentioned. So I think we should link it to the text, to the reliefs, the art part of it, to the coinage, because Andhra excavation has brought out certain coins which showcases that we were shippies and all over. The fact that you can find Kerala or Malabar teak into the western coast in Lothal showcases the entire travel line through which the wood itself would have traveled, or ships would have been built in Kochi and Cochin or Machilipatnam or other places, and then traveled across. So this link is already established. And the most interesting fact, which I'm going to show off today, is about Vasco da Gama. the diary of Vasco da Gama itself, which is lying in one of the British museums. And one of our own, Padma Shri, Shri Vishnu Sridhar, Dr. Saab found this book when he went as a student to Britain, and he studied there and he found this diary. In the diary, Vasco da Gama mentions that how he reached Zanzibar, which is Africa, and through a translator, he asked him that I want to go to India, and he sees a ship which is 3 times the size of his own ship. And this translator takes him to this gentleman called Chandan, who's the owner of the ship, sitting on a cot in a very non-assumed ways. And he says, what is it? He says, I want to go to India. So he says, I'm traveling tomorrow, you can follow me. And the job he used to do was to carry pine wood and teak wood to Africa and take the diamonds back, including spices is what he used to trade in, and take the diamonds from Africa to India. That's the job he used to do. And the ships were not just about the economy, about the trade, but they were also about carrying the activities of religion, culture, and assimilation. And no wonder the areas which were mentioned earlier, like Southeast Asia, Borobudur to Panag to Paramada, all these places itself showcase our heritage. So the temple craft there, you can see the signs meeting Konark Temple or the medieval temples, and very rightly pointed out that 1498 onwards, with the advent of Portuguese, the shipbuilding industry had to change and start putting those guns on the ships, which kind of did not go well with our technology at that time. But I feel we must mention the connection of Rani Abakka also. And I feel very few people know about her, but she was one queen from Karnataka who fought the Portuguese, who defeated the Portuguese, and had her own commercial vessels controlling the sea and trading with the Arabic world, from where she would trade in spices and other stuff. And I feel if we can, and I'm requesting Admiral Saab on this, that if we could name one of our vessels after Rani Abakka, that would be a tribute to her genius and her bravery. And I always feel, looking at the lady officers along with the male officers, that patriotism is something which does not see the gender. It is present in all men and women, thus we must learn to respect the gender also. The gender bias did not exist in this country. Gender bias is foreign to us. So when we are claiming our heritage, we should also claim the heritage of Rani Abakka sailing through the seas and managing the seas and being the front runner of the warring nation, which was obviously when you do well, there will be people who are trying to subdue you and try to control you. So she was once such fierce woman who stood her ground, and I think it's time to reclaim her legacy as well. I must say that when Amrit Kal has just begun, we are all opening our eyes to our own heritage, our own culture. I must mention one more person before I close finally, and that is Admiral Zheng. Admiral Zheng from China sent his own chronicler to India to document Indian shipbuilding because he felt that their ships were dwarfed in front of ours. So I would say, let's reach those heights that people have to send their people to chronicle our history and be so good and so great, reclaim our space in history, reclaim our place in the history of mankind, stay positive, and work for prosperity of India and everybody else, so that the mission is Vasudev Kutumbakam. The world is one big family. Stay connected and connect through trade, culture, and whichever other method for positivity and well-being of the whole mankind. With these words, thank you very much. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
I now request our dignitaries to proceed for unveiling of the stitch ship model